The CEOs of South Africa's top banks and the National Treasury have discussed the consequences of possible US sanctions. Some insiders fear the most damaging consequences would be restrictions on South Africa's access to SWIFT interbank payment network of the US dollar clearing system. According to media reports, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is concerned about the implications of possible US sanctions on South Africa and had intended to raise the matter with Basa, the Banking Association of South Africa. The fears are informed by the US-SA Bilateral Relations Review Act, a bill championed by Congressman Ronny Jackson, which proposes a review of the US-South Africa relations and proposes sanctions on the leaders of the ANC and government officials. Political economist Dale McKinley now joins us for more on this. Dr. McKinley, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Has the Ronny Jackson bill before Congress and later on Senate gained the sort of momentum in its antagonism towards South Africa as the Republicans would have hoped for? To ask it more plainly, should we fear possible sanctions?
Yeah, good evening, Oliver, and to your viewers as well. Look, the Act, the Review Act is going to the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress. It would have to be debated there and passed, and then it would have to be shifted over to the Senate, which would then do the same thing, and it would have to pass the Senate in order for it to become law. So it's still a long way away, and there are a lot of questions domestically whether the Senate in particular, because the House of Representatives, the Republicans are more confident there, I think, of passing. But in the Senate, you only need one or two senators to basically go the other way, and it would not go through. So I don't think, first of all, it's a done deal. And secondly, I think that these kinds of sanctions that are being considered in the Review Act, at least right now, seem to be much more directed at individual government officials, ANC individuals and politicians, as opposed to any real seriousness about a banking financial system. So, I mean, if that was to be included, it would add another completely different dimension to the Review Act.
And this obviously calls in question the U.S. dominance over global financial systems. The SWIFT interbank clearance system is one such vulnerability. We've seen the impact it's had on Afghanistan when the Taliban had taken over there and they got sanctioned. We've seen its impact over Iran and more specifically, more contemporaneously, its effect and impact over Russia when it was sanctioned globally following its invasion of the Ukraine. If South Africa were to face the extent of such sanctions, what effect would it have on our economic activity?
So first, let's just get a few things clear, because I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding of the SWIFT system. The SWIFT system is based in Belgium. It's headquartered in Belgium. It is under EU law. It is not a US-based system. The United States does not have unilateral power to basically remove anybody from the SWIFT system. What you found with Iran and Russia was where EU and the United States jointly engaged in sanctions. And in this case, if it was directed towards South Africa, I don't think that this would fly. And the reason why is because the EU in particular has much, much closer relations with South Africa's financial and banking system and would probably be at odds with the Trump administration, who might want to exclude South Africa from the SWIFT system. So it's not as cut and dried as simply Trump and the United States government wanting South Africa to be excluded. That doesn't going to make it happen. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But having said that, if the United States wants to impose direct bilateral sanctions, as it has done with many countries, then that would certainly have degrees of impact. The United States is our second largest trading partner. There's a lot of financial transactions that go back and forth. And if that was the case and they wanted to try to make life difficult for us in terms of the banking and financial transactions to the United States particularly, then that would mean that South Africa would need to seek some alternatives in order to basically make sure that those transactions were continued. There are alternatives, but they're not as secure and they're certainly not as fast as the SWIFT system.
Yeah, let's perhaps focus on the normative question underpinning this, and that is this highlights once again starkly for us that we're living in a world where the financial systems are centralized. And there's efficiency in centralism, right? It makes it easier for the world to be interconnected into each other through a single financial system. SWIFT plays a role in that. But is there a need to decentralize global financial systems to dilute the Eurocentric influence and stronghold that smaller nation states are beholden to?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any question, especially for those of us who live in the so-called global south, who have had to basically, dance to the tune of the United States and the European banks and the financial system for the last, well, essentially century, if not more. So yes, and there are already moves afoot. In this case, Russia, which was of course sanctioned, or certain banks in Russia were sanctioned and taken out of the SWIFT system, has basically established its own internal messaging system. So SWIFT, by the way, just so everybody understands this, does not deal with money. It doesn't hold money. It doesn't actually it's a messaging system. It's a network, a communications network that allows banks and financial institutions to securely basically process payments. So Russia has already established its own alternative, and and China, even more influentially, has already established its own system as an alternative to SWIFT, which over 110 countries are now already engaged in, and over, I think, 1,200 banks. So there are potentials for alternatives. That would have obviously consequences in terms of, for example, a BRICS alternative, and I think that's what the Trump administration is really worried about. So, but the larger question that you ask is an absolutely essential one, which is to say that most countries in our continent and others would, I think, enjoy seeing a multilateral financial architecture globally, as opposed to one dominated by Europe and the United States.
I think it's a misnomer to say that South Africa's economy is heavily reliant on the U.S. in a non-reciprocal way. The U.S. is reliant on South Africa's critical minerals exports. Is that strong enough or important enough to have Trump and the Republicans reconsider their position on sanctions following the Review Act?
I think, look, they've already exempted what they need. So they've exempted the platinum-based minerals. They've exempted certain other steel and aluminium products. They've exempted certain agricultural products. But yes, the answer to your question is yes. I think it would make them rethink the situation, because what Trump often says he wants to do and what the reality is are quite different things. And when actually something gets implemented, it can change the next day or the next week or the next month. That's what Trump's sort of transactional politics are about. So I think if this basically this Review Act gets to the point of going past the House of Representatives and moving to the Senate, there would be some serious questions asked, not just by the Democrats, but by some of the Republican senators as well, as to whether this is really in the interest of the United States to have such a comprehensive sanctions regime. So I think you could get targeted sanctions, individualized sanctions, but I would be very, very cautious to say that there is a real possibility that it would go beyond that, not because we don't like it, but because simply the United States and many in the United States would realize that it was not in their interest to do so.
We're going to have to leave it there. Dr. Dale McKinley, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Always a fantastic interlocutor. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks,
yeah.